Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In one of Hazrat Mevlana's ghazals, he writes, Dar dast hamishe mushafam bud و از عشق گرفته‌ام چاغانه اندر دهانی که بود تسبیح شعر است او دو بیتی او ترانه. The Quran was always in my hands, and because of love, I have picked up a poem. Now a mouth in which there was a tasbih, are poetry and rubais and songs. We know that when Rumi, as he is called in the West, met Shamsi Tabrizi in 1244, he began to write poetry. We also know that when Shams disappeared in either 1247 or 1248, his loss of Shams led to the outpouring of thousands of verses of poetry, such as this one that Aflaki quotes. Kadr qam har chashme sar begristi, روز و شبها تا سحر بگریستی. شمس تبریزی برفت او کو کسی تا بران فقر و بشر بگریستی. این جهان را گر این سمع و بصر گر بودی سمع و بصر بگسستی. If the eyes in my head were to weep according to my sadness, I would weep day and nights until dawn. Shamsi Tabrizi is gone, and where is someone who will weep for that pride of humankind? This world would weep if its hearing and sight were other than this hearing and sight that it has. It wasn't until about 10 years later, in 1258, that Hazreti Maulana began to write his Kitab al-Masnavi, that is, his book of the Masnavi. We read in the opening bait of the Masnavi, Beshnoin nechon shekayat mikonad, az jodai ha hekayat mikonad. Listen, because this ney, this reed flute, is complaining. It is telling a story because of separations. What a setup to more or less a 25 to 26,000 verse journey through his book of the Masnavi. He writes, not separation, but separations. Over and over in these opening verses, he keeps coming back to this notion of separation. What are these separations that Hazreti Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi is talking about? Certainly, there is his painful, grief-filled separation from Shamsi Tabrizi that is always in the background. But here, in his using the image of the ney, that is the reed flute, Rumi is certainly talking about us, this ney, this human. In this opening, the ney speaks, but really it is we who are the ones speaking, telling our story of the separations in our lives. Or even more so, it is our soul that is speaking, having been separated from its soul bed, if you will, and then having been blown or breathed into this hollow, reed-like body into a world of separations. Indeed, this is the world in which we are living, a world of separations. We see it every day that we live in a world divided. Bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, ageism, sexism, nationalism, classism, me-firstism are the low-hanging fruits of the isms. You ask, what is an ism? An ism portrays a thought that must encompass everything, an all-encompassing belief system which makes me right and you wrong. Of course, there's more to mention. In the last half of the 20th century, CRT, that is critical race theory, and EDI, which stands for the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion movement, appeared, both coming about with the best of intentions, but it seems that instead of including people, even more of a separation has been created between people, I hope and pray, as an unintentional consequence. And there's also the talk of weaponizing of language. It's hard enough to already communicate with each other, but it seems that we are in the process of driving a wedge between people and pushing each other farther apart with our words, when that is all that we have to communicate information and truth with. I'm not intending to be political here, but as I just said, what originally may have been with the best of intention seems to be causing more of a separation between people rather than unifying. All of these things mentioned increase both the separateness and the separation we have with and between each other. However, there are a couple more items that are worth mentioning. Alcoholism and all of the other iterations of addiction are certainly manifestations of the separation felt by many people. Even more, addictions reveal the many different ways people try to fill the so-called hole that exists within the addict or alcoholic, which in the end is a cause of greater separation both within and without the individual. The isolation of the individual in a seemingly endless despair, which leads to a loss of connection with others and a loss of connection, another kind of separation, if you will, with one's own true self. Another topic worth mentioning is a kind of narcissistic personality disorder. Now, narcissism, as most of you know, is a mental condition in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, often troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. However, behind this mask of what often seems to be extreme confidence lies a fragile self-image and a low self-esteem that's vulnerable to even the slightest of criticisms. Certainly, this disorder causes a separation between the individual and others, and I'm sure we could each list several people who might fit into this category. But I'd also like to mention another one that you may not know. It's called covert narcissism. A covert narcissist is also clearly on the personality disorder spectrum, but also has traits that are usually not associated with a narcissist, like shyness and introversion, self-consciousness, insecurity, defensiveness, envy, sensitivity to what others think about them, passive aggressiveness, self-deprecation, feelings of inadequacy, and co-occurring feelings of depression, anxiety, and emptiness. The individual with these traits does not display a sense of self-importance normally associated with narcissism, yet the individual, more or less through the back door, draws the attention to themselves and, as would be typical of the narcissist, makes every situation about the self and not the other. It's about the me and not the you, thereby creating separation between the covert narcissist and everyone around them. Because of the loss of a loved one, people experience a very personal and deep awareness of separation. With the loss of a partner or loved one, the pain and grief of the loss of the attachment bond brings often harshly into reality an existential loneliness. Once together in the safety and comfort of a long-time attachment, now gone, never to return, separated from that one who saw me and made me feel seen and not alone. We could also add depression, anxiety, loneliness, and grief to this conversation. These not only bring about separation, but can also be caused by separation. All people feel separation in one way or another in their lives, but depression caused by separation and loss can become a very serious problem for human health. In fact, it is considered one of the main causes of suicide. That would be the ultimate separation. The rise of social media and its growing tsunami of influence, if you will, gives the illusion of connection, but in reality is, in my opinion, covert digital separation. We act as if we are connected to others with friending and likes and thumbs up, but we are actually driving an invisible wedge between people as we sit in our rooms or cars or cities and live in the illusion created by the trope of connectivity, quite often with other people sitting right next to us. How often have we seen a group of people sitting or walking together, each of them with their phones, talking or texting, and not having a conversation with the living, breathing human being that is right next to them? I believe that all of these are actually indicators of our desire to be connected, but what we do instead of truly connecting with another human is to create a cheat. Faux connections, if you will, are made by the commonalities people find in groups beyond social media that are based in religion, nationalism, sports, chasing after fame, clubs, fandom, and sadly to say also in hatred, bigotry, alcoholism, addictions, cults, and on and on. None of these, in my opinion, have their basis in a true connection with another person in which we can share ourselves completely without wearing the mask or masks we use to hide our wounded, broken lives of lonely separation or our own terminal uniqueness. Rather, these might all be hints of that existential loneliness that many people experience. Existential loneliness, or EL, is understood as an intolerable emptiness, sadness, and longing that results from the awareness of one's fundamental separateness as a human being. EL is mostly experienced in life-threatening situations because it is in the confrontation with death that one is most aware of one's own fundamental aloneness. This loneliness can be nullified neither by the presence of others nor by an adequate dealing with feelings, and the isolation of having to die alone remains. EL is therefore claimed to be essential to the understanding of the loneliness of dying and being left alone after a death or a loss. In other words, I am truly alone in the world and separated from everyone. The author, philosopher, and storyteller C.S. Lewis said in a sermon he delivered on June 8, 1941, "The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them, and what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers, for they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never visited." So in my opinion, we create illusions and live in these illusions as if they are real, and thereby we do not realize, if at all, the extent of our separation from others, from creation, from God, and from ourselves. A student asked me in this context, so can we infer that everyone is at a different degree of separation from our origin? Well, my answer was to answer with another question. Well, is it that we each have a different degree of separation, or do we each have a different awareness of just how separated we are? Maybe it's the pain of this world that teaches me just how separated I am from you, myself, and my source. As I was writing this script, I remembered the book by Richard Bach, the author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, called Illusions. In chapter 13, he wrote, "We are all free to do whatever we want to do," he said that night. Isn't that simple and clean and clear? Isn't that a great way to run the universe? Almost. You forgot a pretty important part, I said. Oh? We are all free to do what we want to do. As long as we don't hurt somebody else, I chided. I know you meant that, but you ought to say what you mean. So my question is, but do we all really mean that? In the opening verses of the Masnavi, Hazrati Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi uses the words like raw and greed and greedy and selfishness to describe us and tells us, Man chegune hush daram pish o pas, chun nabashad nure yaram pish o pas. How will I have understanding before me or behind me when the light of my friend is not before me or behind me? He tells us, hinting at the Quran, that we don't have this light because our mirror, that is, the mirror of our heart, is covered with rust. The rust created by our selfishness and attachment to the things of this world, and therefore, because of that, it cannot reflect that light. Ayanat dani chera gamaz nist, zank zengar az rohash mumtaz nist, he writes. Do you know why your mirror is not sparkling? He writes because the rust is not separated from its surface. Hazrati Maulana writes in the introduction to the first volume of his Masnavi that this book of the Masnavi is the cure for hearts and the clearing out of sorrows and the explainer of the Quran in the abundance of provisions and the healer of one's character. So what is it that Rumi wants to teach us in his Masnavi? Well, turning to a later place in the first volume of the Masnavi, he offers a teaching to us with this story. Someone came to the door of a beloved friend. His friend said, Who are you, O trustworthy one? He said, It's me. His friend said, Go, it's not the time. There is no place for the raw at such a feast. Except for the fire of absence and separation, who will cook the raw? Who will rescue him from hypocrisy? Rumi writes. So that poor person left, and for a year in travel, burned in separation from the sparks. And after a while, that burned one became cooked, so he returned. Again, he walked around the house of the friend. He knocked on the door with 100 fears and with adab. Adab is the proper action with the proper intention. So that a word that was be-adab, meaning a word that was without the proper action intention, would not leap from his lips. His friend called out, Who's at the door? He said, It's you at the door, O heart stealer. And the friend said, Now since you are me, O me, come in. You see, there is not room in the house for two me's. I get it. So in order to put me, my, I, or myself in proper perspective and to have my ego become the right size, I need to first become aware of my relationship, or better, the lack of relationship I have with you. I am on the path to becoming right-sized when I become conscious of my selfish nature and how I have made me bigger and more important than you and put me first and have not acknowledged the you that exists right in front of me. I can only begin to approach the right size of my ego when I begin my sentence with you. No, actually, I must think about you before I begin my sentence. And when I do that, I start to become more right-sized and begin to lessen that separation that exists between you and me. However, after I do that, the more difficult task is to lessen that separation that exists within my own self, about which I am probably not even aware, because there is rust covering the mirror of my heart, which needs to be cleaned off, and then to ultimately lessen the separation that exists between myself and God. In another one of his works, Hazreti Maulana writes in his Divan-i-Shams, Bishtar, Bishtar, come closer, closer. How long will you continue with this highway robbery? Since you are me and I am you, how long will you continue with this you-ness and me-ness? We are God's light and the glass of the lamp as well, and yet there is so much quarreling among ourselves. What is the cause of such a light to run from another light? We are all one, perfect. So what is causing us to be cross-eyed? Why do the wealthy look toward the poor with contempt? Why does the right hand look toward its own left with contempt? Since both of the hands are yours, which one is fortunate and which one is inferior? We are all one essence, one intellect, and one head. But because of this curved heaven, we are now seeing double. So carry your goods that are from these 5 senses and 6 directions toward oneness. How long will you continue to bend the juniper tree of oneness? Come on, get up from meanness. Mix with everyone. When you are just with your own self, you are a seed. But when you are with everyone, you are like a mine. No matter whatever a male lion does, the dog will still act like a dog. No matter what the pure soul does, the body will still act like a body. Know that you are one soul, even though the body is counted in hundreds of thousands. This is just like the almonds that are now in the form of a butter. There are many words in the world, but they all have one meaning. The water becomes one when you break the jars. That's it. We are in reality an ocean, a mine filled with treasures, but all of that is trapped inside this human jar that continues to do what it wants to do. But as the story of the Nay reminds us, this ocean, these treasures that are contained in our hollow, physical reed-like body are from the divine breath of Hu that has been blown into this Nay, that is, into each one of us. Both the Bible and the Quran teach us this. In Genesis 2:7 it says, Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, and he breathed into his nose, that is Adam's nose, a living soul. And in the Quran, Surah Al-Hijr, that is Surah 15, Ayat 29, Sawaituhu wa nafakhtu fihi min ruhi, I have fashioned him and breathed into him of my ruh, that is, of my soul. God's spirit, God's breath, God's soul. We are the light of God. We are the mirror of God, and we are the breath of God. May our eyes be opened so that we each see how we continue to create separations between each other, and that we might break the jars of meanness, of ego, of self, so that our soul water might once again become one with each other, and that we might start scraping and polishing the rust of selfishness and greed off of the mirror of our heart, so that we might first see ourselves more clearly and then begin to break down the walls of separation between you and me by my becoming more right-sized and seeing you more right-sized as well, so that we might truly see and hear each other once again, inshallah. Ashkani Azaderim, I wish for you only love. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.